Okay, well, I would like to call this meeting to order for the City of Newberg Budget Committee. My name's Beth Koshman and I'm currently the chair. I guess I'd like to read the Newberg's mission and vision statement before we begin. The City of Newberg serves its citizens, promotes safety, and maintains a healthy community. Our vision statement: Newberg will cultivate a healthy, safe environment where citizens can work, play, and grow in a friendly, dynamic, and diverse community, valuing partnerships and opportunity. So I guess the first order of business is roll call. There's a lot of new faces on the budget committee and also even some staff. So I guess I'd like to go through and Sue, does it need to be separate, the committee? Or is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay, I'd like everyone just to introduce themselves. How are we going to go in order? Well, maybe can you call our names so we stay in order? Sue, can you call our names? When Sue calls your name, if you're here, I'd like you just to introduce yourself and say if you're a citizen member or a council member or your role on staff, and how long you've been on the budget committee or with the City of Newberg.
I'm just gonna go with the people I see on the screen for now. Greg Minahan.
Hello, Greg Minahan here, and I am a citizen member.
Beth Koshman.
Citizen member. I've been the chair of the budget committee for the last 2 years, and I think I've been on the committee for either 5 or 6 years.
Timothy Carpenter. I just promoted him, so he may not have unmuted himself yet. Timothy Carpenter. Okay. He was having trouble joining. Brad Sitton.
I'm Brad Sitton. I'm a citizen member, and like Beth, I've been on the committee, 5 or 6 years? And I was assistant chair last year?
Mm-hmm. And the year before, I think.
Molly Olson.
Citizen member, been on the budget committee. This will be the 3rd year.
Lozelle Mathai.
Mathai.
Sorry.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Lozelle Mathai. I'm a citizen member and I'm new to the budget committee. This is my first meeting.
Welcome.
Rick Rogers.
Greetings, Newberg Mayor Rick Rogers. Nice to see you all.
Denise Bacon.
Newberg City Councilor, District 3. I've been on the budget committee for 13 years.
Bryce Cofield.
What up, Bryce Cofield, City Council, first year, District 4.
Stephanie Finley.
Hi, I'm Stephanie and I'm District 6 Councilor and 3 years maybe.
Julia Martinez Plancarte.
Hi folks, Julia Martinez, counselor for District 2, 2nd year, and my pronouns are she, her, and they.
Mike McBride.
Newberg City Council, District 5. This is my first year.
And we'll go back and try Timothy again. Timothy Carpenter.
Hi, this is Tim.
And then I'm not seeing Solomon. Okay. Kezia Warner.
Good evening. My name is Kezia Warner, as Sue said, and I am the Assistant City Manager. I know some of you and not others. I've been in my position since October, and I oversee HR, finance, and IT. I'm pleased to join you tonight.
Dan Weinheimer.
Yeah, I'm Dan Weinheimer. I'm the city manager. This is my second budget committee. I've been here a little more than a year, so I got here just in time for the first one. So looking forward to the second go round.
Dan Coiler.
Hey, I'm Dan Coiler. I've been the senior accountant with City of Newberg for 4.5 years. I'm now the interim finance manager, and this will be my 4th budget cycle with the City of Newberg.
And Rob Moody.
Good evening, all. My name's Rob Moody. I'm a partner with Marina and Company. We are contracted with the city to provide financial support in this transition. Once the finance director and assistant finance director left the city. And I've been working with Kezia and Dan to bring this proposed budget that you'll all see here in a couple of weeks. So happy to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
I'm Sue. I'm the city recorder. I've been here, oh gosh, almost 7 years now. And then we'll circle back around to Elise to introduce herself.
Hi, Elise Yarnell Holloman, City Councilor. Thanks.
So Beth, it looks like you have everybody but Solomon tonight.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is our first budget committee of 2021. It's our second year of doing it via video conferencing. I guess before we get into the business, I would just say to remind you to please keep your mic muted unless you have a question to ask or want to speak to the committee. And you can raise your hand either on the screen or if you want to raise, there's a little hand somewhere and we can call on you that way too. Okay, so our first order of business is the election of presiding officers. I've chosen to retire this year, so we are open. And so we are open to new nominations. Anybody has any?
Well, I haven't spoken to my neighbor, but I would like to nominate my neighbor, Molly Olson. Sorry, Molly.
You excel at troublemaking, Rick.
I owe you one potentially.
I'm fine. I already chatted with Beth last year. She said, would you do it? And I'm like, it's only my second year. I'm not smart enough on this yet. One more year. And so she came back and said, it's been a year. I said, okay. So if you all would like, I would be happy to chair this. But if someone else wants it, you know, it's completely okay.
I second that nomination.
Perfect.
Elise, I thought you liked me. No, okay.
I do. I like you that much.
Okay, are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, all in favor of Molly being chair, raise your hand. Oh, great. Okay, Molly, you are our new chair. And now we need a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Brad Sitton has been our vice chair for the last couple of years.
I'd like to nominate Brad for our vice chair again, if possible. Sorry, Brad.
I appreciate that. But like Beth, I think I have to step back. There's a couple of these meetings that due to job requirements, I may not be able to make, and I don't want to shortchange anybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we have traditionally had the chair and the vice chair were citizen members, but.
Is anyone not terrified of doing it? Because I am not bad to work with, just so you know. It could be a lot worse.
We can nominate Solomon since he's not here.
What about Stephanie?
Well, I was thinking, Tim, you've been doing this quite a while. Is that something that you would be interested in? And if so, I'd like to nominate Tim.
I should be here for all the meetings. I guess I could accept that.
You could accept that?
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, so all those in favor of Tim being the vice chair, show with the raise of hands. Oh,
Who was the second on the motion?
Oh, I would like to second that.
All right, thank you, Molly.
okay. Welcome, Tim. And Molly, I hand the reins over to you. I'm sorry, I don't have a gavel to hand you.
This was my biggest fear, so I'm happy to take advice from Dan or Rob or Dan as to how to proceed other than you gave me the agenda. So if that's what you'd like me to do, I'm good.
Yeah, I think we gave you the agenda. The intent tonight is really to kind of give overview and structure and Q&A. And so, yeah, I think if we want to maybe run through the two presentations and see what questions are generated. that could be a good way to go.
Perfect. Do you want to entertain questions during the presentation, or do you want to wait till you're done? What's your pleasure?
Well, Rob's going first, so I'll let him answer that, but I'm fine to answer questions throughout.
Yeah, I am as well. It is a little challenging to see somebody in these really small squares while sharing screens. So if you have a question, if you want to just go ahead and speak up, that's not going to bother me at all.
Okay, yeah, it's hard to figure out when hands are raised when the stuff gets really small. So thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh.
my mommy raised me well.
Yeah.
So
all the benefits of the job already, Molly? You're Madam
Chair and Mr. Mayor. All right, so
All right, here's my chair.
I put this together. It's really sort of a budget 101, if you will. And I realize there are some of you who have been doing this a very long time. So Denise, I hope you'll be patient with me. I'm going to run through some stuff that's fairly basic, but hopefully we'll touch on some things that are fairly specific also to the city of Newberg, and hopefully will help prompt and drive some of the communication. One of the things I want to mention straight up front is, because you all have not been provided the budget document or a budget message, under Oregon local budget law, we cannot discuss specifics of the proposed budget that you'll be getting here in a couple of 3 weeks. So if you have questions about specifics of kind of where we're going with this year's budget, if we can couch those in terms of kind of general direction or policy, that's going to allow us to have that conversation without getting sideways with the law. So I just wanted to mention that we're going to try and stay out of the specifics tonight. All right. And Dan's asked me to kind of rein him in if he goes down that rabbit hole too far. So Kezia and I will be playing, referee, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I'm going to go ahead and jump start this. I'm not sure if I have the ability to move slides forward, or I guess I'll just have to ask Sue to do that. Yes. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Sue, if you would. Thank you. So really, I've broken this up into about three big chunks, if you will, and the objective of a budget in simple terms the objective of the process is to provide a clear implementable budget to the city council for their consideration. That's the role of the budget committee and staff before them. Because as you'll see when we get into specific roles and of each player in the process, the council has the ultimate accountability to the community for the city's resources in the budget. Our approach, we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities of those players. We're going to talk a little bit about the rules of the game, and then we'll wrap up with talking about some timelines and some milestones that get us to the finish line in accordance with local budget law. And then that ultimate deliverable, if you will, is the adopted budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. So Sue, if you could take me to that next slide, please. So kind of an overview, these in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about that specific purpose of the budget. Again, roles and responsibilities. What are some of those rules of budgeting? What has to happen in what order in order to get us there? We're going to look at some internal aspects of how that budget is developed and what some of those guiding principles are. I mentioned the timelines and milestones and deliverables. And then if we don't cover your questions completely as we go through, we'll have a chance at the end before Dan kicks off his piece of it. Okay, Sue. Thank you. So the purpose, I mean, in just really simple terms, is to plan for the city's operations for fiscal year 21-22 by aligning resources to carry out those operations, right? I mean, that's about as simple as it gets. It's giving the departments and the city the tools they need to accomplish their objectives. There's a major difference between a budget for a local government versus a budget for a not-for-profit or a for-profit business. In a not-for-profit or a for-profit, those budgets are spending plans, right? They can change and do change, maybe month to month, week to week, depending on changes in the environment, changes in whatever. And they're typically not a public process either. In a local government setting, it's a very public process. Hence, all the public members of this committee, the public hearings that we'll be having, and the opportunity for public input, as well as being a legally binding document. And what that means is, it's kind of funny. I've been doing this a long time, and the budget and over expenditure of a local government's budget, the city council can be held personally liable for those over expenditures under Oregon law. Now, I've never seen that enforced, but it is there. Normally what happens if there's an over expenditure is you get a nasty letter from the Secretary of State, and they want to know what you're going to do to not do it again. But it is a violation of law. So these budgets are important. They provide an opportunity to prioritize across programs. For example, if the council, say, has made public safety, I'm making it up, if they've decided that public safety is the primary driver, and that's what the community is most interested in, and that's where the most work is needed, then it would make sense to reflect that prioritization in the resource allocation, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for at a very basic policy level in the budget process. There's some compliance aspects. Obviously, we have to get this thing adopted by June 30th in order to be able to open the doors on July 1st. Because without a legally binding and adopted budget, you don't have the authority to spend even $1 on July 1st. So there's those compliance types of aspects. And then the transparency that comes with accountability in the budget. The process is designed to be transparent to the community, to all interested parties. A lot of budget committees that I've worked with in the past have struggled with the sense that they're a rubber stamp. And the process is not set up to be that way. I've seen it interpreted that way, and I've seen it carried out that way, but that's not the intent under local budget law. You all play a very important part, and we'll get to that here in just a second. Sue? Thank you. So these are the various roles and responsibilities that we're going to talk about tonight. Each of these blocks, if you will, has a really important role to play in the process. So we're going to look at the city council and the budget committee, the city manager's role, finance's role, and then the department directors as staff that also contribute both at the front end and on the back end of this process. Sue? So first, we'll look at city council. Council sets the goals and objectives for the city, and they've done that previously in their goal setting sessions, and those goals have been communicated both to the city manager and through him to staff. It's really about policy direction, identifying what's most important to make Newberg better as a community, to make Newberg more vibrant, more viable, whatever whatever that criteria is that you all have established, but it's driving to get Newberg to be what you want it to be. And the council sets that policy to try and put some rails on that to get us there. They set that direction, and then ultimately they adopt the budget and have that accountability for the city's resources. It's a stewardship function. Okay, Sue? The budget committee's role, again, is at a very policy level. Now, I've worked with budget committees for the last probably 25 years off and on, either as a finance officer myself or as a consultant or as an auditor. And it's very, sometimes the will is strong with budget committees to get into some pretty serious weeds. And that's not always, because of time constraints and a lot of other things, that's not always the best use of a budget committee's resources or their skills and knowledge and all of that value that you can bring to the process. A lot of that can get stalled out if you stay at that higher level and reinforce that policy that's brought by the city council. Then it becomes an exercise in alignment of resources with policy, right? I mean, that makes some sense. If, again, going back to my earlier example, if public safety is the big driver, then it makes some sense for the budget committee to work to try and align resources with the objectives in that area. Again, I'm making that up. I have no idea if that's really where y'all want to go. But that's the beauty of this process, is you all have a very direct input into what is the policy direction and what is the objective and how do we align those resources. Ultimately, at the end of our few meetings together, you as a group will approve the budget as either presented or amended. And that's a very distinct step in the process. That approval signals the end of the budget committee's involvement in the process and sends that budget then to the city council for adoption. There's three iterations of the budget, if you will. The proposed that you'll get here in a couple of weeks that was prepared by staff, the approved budget then that the committee will send to the council, and the adopted budget as adopted by the council that then becomes the operational plan for the city's finances for next year. Any questions so far? I'm going through this kind of fast. I appreciate that, but we good? All right, I'm seeing some nods. Good. Sue? All right, so the next role then that I want to talk about is the city manager. So in his role as city manager, Dan works with the staff to present a proposed budget for consideration of the committee. A lot of work has gone into the document to date. We're very, very close to being able to have that document ready to send out to you here in, about 5 days before the first budget committee meeting. But there's a lot that has gone into that, and it's the city manager's job to sort of shepherd that through the process as the budget officer. Once that budget has been through the process, and he will present his budget message at that very first budget committee meeting that gives you an overview and sort of a little glimpse behind the curtain, if you will, into how we got to where we are. Once that budget then has been adopted, it's the city manager's role then to execute that budget, working with department heads and staff to make sure that we stay within the bounds of that adopted budget. And hand in hand with that, it's working to implement the direction of the council, right? Again, we're back to that alignment of policy and resources. I've seen some situations where those two disconnect, and it makes for a really long year for an entity because people are frustrated because things aren't getting done, but the resources aren't there to get the things done that people thought were important. So that's really the role to be played here. Sue? Thank you. So finance then, and I typically put finance director on this slide, but that's not the case here. Right now, we're kind of a team concept in finance. It's me working very closely with Dan and with Kezia and with all the team in the finance department. But really our role has been to take the mechanics and mix in a little bit of art and maybe a little bit of magic to make this thing come together, and to try and tell a story with numbers and words that can get you all to a place where you're comfortable that that alignment is present. So we've driven in finance, we try to drive the compilation of that budget document and the process all the way through to adoption. And there's a lot, I guess just suffice it to say, there's a lot of players involved. Our community engagement specialist, Lacey, has done a tremendous job of stepping up to actually do some of that actual compilation. And so I want to make sure that we recognize her through the process as well. We do the math. Quite honestly, in finance, we're charged with doing the math, making sure these things balance, making sure resources and uses balance by fund, and that the summaries that you'll be given, that all of that ties, and that it's all supported by good solid math. And again, once the budget's adopted, finance has that special role of compliance and monitoring. So we pay attention to purchase orders as they come through and make sure that they're within the budget. We make sure that spending stays within the budget. We, will take the responsibility for bringing budget adjustments to the council as necessary to make sure that we're able to accomplish the objectives, but within that framework of legal compliance. And also by providing reports, monthly financial reports to the council and to staff for review. That's a big part of internal control and monitoring with respect to the budget, is making sure that the department heads are looking at their budget to actuals each month. And if there's an error or something gets out of whack, then we have a conversation. Okay, Sue. And then finally, department directors, they're there to advocate for their, and their role is very much like that of finance, but they're there to also advocate for their programs and to advocate for getting the objectives of their programs accomplished that feed up to the council's goals. They're accountable to that adopted budget and part of that conversation throughout. And then, like I said, their role is a lot the same as finance, but they're a lot more hands-on and in the weeds than the finance group is. All right, Sue. So that's the players and roles and responsibilities. Any questions on that part before I jump into this next piece? Okay. So in terms of rule, and my dog's going to bark here in a second because the Amazon guy just walked up my front steps. So I'm just going to apologize right up front. It's the joy of working at home. So rules and requirements. So the process has some side rails to it, if you will. And those come in the form of ORS 294, Oregon Local Budget Law. Somebody mentioned to me a couple of days ago that she had come from another state and she was amazed at the extent to which the state drives the budget process for local governments. And I'm like, well, it's the only thing I've ever known. I've only worked in Oregon really in terms of local government. So it's second nature. And it doesn't change very often, which is kind of a good thing. So we can kind of stay up with it. But the process itself has several well-defined steps. We've talked about those a little bit in terms of the proposed, the approved, the adopted, and having those public hearings, having those opportunities for public input, requiring a balanced budget. You know, it's got some real clear kind of criteria that have to be met throughout the process, as well as the players and defining the players. You're required on your budget committee to have an equal number of appointed citizen members as you have elected officials. That's to make sure that that representation is there. Deadlines, really what we do there is we start at June 30th as the last date for adopting a budget and work backwards from there. I actually have seen budgets adopted on June 30th. There really isn't any wiggle room there. I mean, you don't have much time to deliberate or to discuss much when you got to get it done by midnight on June 30th. That's a funny story I can tell some of you sometime, maybe over a beer or something, but we don't really have time here this evening. And then over expenditures, I talked a little bit about the consequences. You know, it's really theory or what's stated in law versus the practical application of that law. I know as a finance professional and my colleagues that are finance professionals around the state work very hard to avoid these over expenditures. I don't think, department heads purposely go out and decide they're gonna, that they're gonna bulldoze your budget, but it happens from time to time. And so we work within the bounds of local budget law and its allowances to make adjustments to the process throughout the year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Sue? Thank you. So one of the drivers in budgeting and one of the very basic building blocks of governmental accounting and reporting is the concept of fund accounting. Some of you may be real familiar with this. This may be a kind of a foreign concept to some of you. When I taught governmental accounting at Portland State, I talked about funds as buckets. It really helps to kind of keep that concept of different buckets. Each fund is a bucket and has to balance in and of itself. The buckets of money are all different colors and there's different colored money in each bucket. You can't take the green money out of the green bucket and just drop it in the yellow bucket because the yellow bucket's empty. Okay, the yellow bucket's the general fund and the general fund never has enough money. That's kind of the way it works in local government, right? I live in Sherwood and we built a grade school here behind me a few years back. And so they issued a bond, they built the school, they advertised in the paper that the school came in ahead of schedule and under budget by about $1 million. And people in Sherwood were crazy happy, right? Until September when they opened the school and there wasn't enough money in the general fund to hire teachers to fully staff this new school. So class sizes really didn't get any smaller. Well, people were furious. They're like, well, what you told us, you came in $1 million under budget. Use that to buy some teachers. It doesn't work that way. Okay, that money was specifically restricted for construction. And when it wasn't needed on construction, the bond document stated it had to be used to pay down the debt service. So you have to understand that each bucket has this set of strings or set of rules to it, and you can't just shuffle them back and forth. So hopefully that helps kind of illustrate that concept of fund accounting. Within each fund, there's these categories. Lizelle, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you. I'm very familiar with fund accounting. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss you.
Yeah, and I remember the conversation I had with my friends in Sherwood about the same thing.
Oh yeah, we have some spirited conversations around here. So within each fund, then there's categories and appropriations. So the categories are personal services, materials and services, capital outlay, transfers, contingency. Okay. Those are the categories or groupings of budget appropriation. And appropriation, people get confused between appropriations and expenditures. Expenditures are the dollars going out the door. Appropriation is the authority to spend those dollars. So you might have a whole bunch of money in a fund, but if you don't have the budget authority in the form of an appropriation to spend it, you can't touch it. Okay. So there's this dance that goes on between flexibility and security, right? And so that's what, and we'll talk a little bit about that kind of coming up here on a slide in just a moment, but you need to understand that the legal level of appropriation within each fund becomes what drives that measurement of whether or not we're overexpending at, you know, at the staff level. Sue? Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about those budget philosophies, because they come into play, you know, at the staff level and carry over some to the committee. The committee, through your interaction, will evolve a budget philosophy of your own, and the council has a budget philosophy, either consciously or subconsciously, that drives decisions. It's things like, in the event that you make a determination that you need to cut the budget, there's really two ways of going at that, right? There's the old, well, everybody take a whack at 5%. I want to see a 5% reduction across the board, versus what we refer to as surgical reductions. Okay. I have an opinion. My opinion doesn't matter here, but I've always favored surgical approaches, because I've always looked at it that if you take a 5% whack across the board, you've really reduced everybody's ability to do the best job they can, versus you might make a reduction in an area that's not a council priority, but allow somebody else to still do their best work because they're funded. So again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's a person, that's like the world according to Rob, okay? But there's lots of those kind of philosophical conversations. There's philosophies about what's an appropriate level of contingency or reserves in a fund to make sure that you have the buffer you need to get from July until November, when the property taxes come in. Or what's the appropriate buffer to have in a utility fund that has a relatively steady revenue source, but allows you to address, you know, unforeseen circumstances, etc. Contingencies really provide that buffer. It's a flexible means of providing funding for things that come up during the year that were not anticipated during the budget. Contingency, in order to access it, still requires council action. In order, you cannot spend, staff cannot spend directly from contingency. We have to come to the council and request a transfer from contingency to, say, materials and services, so that we could spend that money for the whatever the stated purpose is. So again, it's, and carryovers, you know, whatever doesn't get spent in a fund during the year ends up becoming the beginning balance the following year. So we try and maintain those at some reasonable level to provide for sustainability of whatever the program is. Reserves, a lot of times contingencies, carryovers, and reserves are used interchangeably, but specifically reserves can refer to monies that are specifically kind of set aside for a purpose. And in some of the funds, when we get the budget document to you, you'll see some funds have a reserve for future expenditures. It makes sense to set aside monies sometimes. If you've got a big capital project that's coming, you know, you're trying to set aside money for it, and you've set your rates so that you're setting aside money for something like that, it makes sense to go ahead and identify it that way. And like I said, that flexibility, providing that flexibility to staff to meet those things that come about during the year is important, but it's also important to make sure that you're managing that sustainability. Unappropriated ending fund balance it's another way of keeping dollars from being spent. It's a pretty harsh tool when it's used that way, because under local budget law, the only way to access unappropriated ending fund balance is in response to an act of God. So like if we had a tornado that came through and, wiped out the water treatment plant, you would be able then to go into unappropriated ending fund balance in a fund, use that money, and then come to council and say, this is why we did it. Barring that, you're kind of hosed. You can't touch that money. We do use it in a debt service fund to make sure that we're allowing to have enough money to pay like that first interest payment of the following year. It's sort of it's a money management tool that's used by finance professionals, and it helps keep us stable and helps keep the bond people happy to know that that there's really no risk of defaulting on that first payment, and that buys you enough time, right, to get to that second payment after the property taxes come in or whatever. All right, next slide, please. So I want to just talk a little bit in some general terms about some trends and forecasts that have impacted the way we put the budget together, not just this year, but every year. So we look at things like property taxes. Property taxes are the single largest general use revenue source to the city. We still don't know what the COVID impacts are on property taxes. I think a lot of folks that I was talking to, this time last year, were expecting to see a big drop in property tax revenues this last November. I think the state was anticipating that. It really didn't happen that way. But there can be a lag. And I think folks are being conservative, and folks are being careful about their spending and not anticipating a tremendous amount of growth in property taxes this next year. Statutorily, assessed values can go up 3%, plus any new development, new growth within Newberg would be factored into that. We have been pretty conservative in our estimate of property tax revenues for this next fiscal year. And the reason for that is we know that if it works out that there's more money comes in than we anticipated, we can come back to the council with a supplemental budget, recognize that revenue, and then go forward with some appropriations at the direction of council to put that money to good use. Yeah, Molly. Sorry, Madam Chair.
No, that's fine. That makes me feel very odd to have a title. So Molly is fine. When you say you've been very conservative, and tell me if this is too detailed, but there is a downside to being so conservative that you end up cutting things you didn't need to do. So very conservative in line with how we've been conservative in the past, or is this incremental? Or tell me, wait and get the budget and see. I'm okay either way, but.
Fair enough. I can't really compare to prior years because I have no idea how it was done in the past. But in terms of, I don't feel like we've been overly conservative where we've had to, bring a situation of significant deep cuts. I don't think you'll be seeing, I don't anticipate that you're going to be shocked by the budget that comes before you. I don't really want to go any further than that.
Dan isn't hiding under his desk, so it's probably okay. All right, good. Just
no, but I think what we ended up doing was we projected something right around 3% growth in assessed value and translated that into property tax revenues. But we didn't make any serious assumptions in the calculations that are inconsistent with prior years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Transit lodging tax. Okay, here's one that did take a hit with COVID. I mean, and that's not a surprise to anyone. It is starting to trend back across the state, some places more than others. But again, we've been fairly conservative in our approach to how we projected TLT and how we're allocating those resources. One of the statistics I heard early on in the COVID era, if you will, is that for every week that we were shut down, it could take 6 to 10 weeks to recover. Now, I don't know, I can't even tell you who said that. It was some economist, and my kids used to come home and go, Dad, everybody's out of work, but the economist says it's getting better. And I said, well, that's because the economist still has a job. But you know, they had this concept that for every week it would take this extended period to build back, and I think we've seen some of that. I don't know if that 6 to 10 weeks is correct, but we're not bouncing back quite as fast as people, you know, thought. I was talking to my wife the other day, and we were, you know, sitting around this time of year last year thinking, well, in June this thing will all be gone, right? Well, it didn't really work out that way. So we're all still just trying to find our way through this. Talk a little bit about capital projects. The philosophy, I can't really speak to the philosophy of the past and how these were budgeted, but what the approach that we've tried to take, or the psychology of capital projects, is that we're going to try and budget for what we think we can get done this year or in 21, 22. And the rest you'll see either in contingency or in reserves. Because if you budget all of the money that you have available for capital projects as though you're going to spend it, those variances between budget and actual become pretty meaningless. And it's really difficult to gauge performance of your departments or of your department heads, or, you know, wherever the accountability lies. So we've tried to adjust our philosophy a little bit in that area. We did move some amounts that were previously sitting in operations to capital. There were some large fund balances in some of the operating funds for water, for the utilities. We've moved that to capital because that's where it was always intended to be spent anyway. So it presents a more, I guess, meaningful split between operations and capital. Allocations of support costs, you'll see this when we get the budget to you. We have an administrative services fund, Fund 31, where we have all of the support services are housed. And those services then are costed and then allocated out across the operating funds based on the services provided to those funds. Payroll, accounts payable, HR, budgeting, audit, all of those things that IT, those things are all allocated out to the operating funds based on what we believe are some meaningful bases. And Sue. So timelines and milestones, you know, here we are with a proposed budget that's been developed over the last several weeks and that you all have in your hands in just a couple more weeks. Then we'll look to the committee to take action and approve that budget by the end of April. Council deliberation and adoption then will occur at that first meeting in June. They'll have a chance to take a look at it and have a public hearing in May, but we'll anticipate adoption at that first meeting in June. That gives us a little bit of wiggle room in case something goes sideways and we need that second meeting in June to adopt, you know, just in case. And then again, following adoption, we have our budget execution, which is just basically putting into play all those financial plans. It also, this layout allows us some time in between to work through any amendments that occur through the process, and allows us to kind of bring back that revised document to y'all. And let's see, Sue, our deliverables, our first deliverable was the budget request that came into the city manager and to finance from the departments. The proposed budget to the budget committee will be the next major deliverable, and we've been talking about that. The approved budget to the city council will follow that. And finally, we'll deliver an adopted budget to the county by July 15th in accordance with local budget law. Any budget adjustments will be deliverables and will be council action items. And then the monthly financial reports kind of bring it home. And then Sue, just a quick comment on that, on the next slide here with respect to budget execution. It's really just all about compliance and then being ahead of it just enough to bring those adjustments and changes to keep us in line with local budget law as things happen. And next slide, that brings us home. Are there any questions from the committee or from the council? I guess you're all the committee now. So are there any questions from the committee that I can field? I'd be happy to take those. I don't see anybody jumping up and down. Yeah, Bryce?
Yeah, quick question. So you mentioned we'll get to see the proposed budget here in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir.
But you had said something at the forefront of the meeting that we are not allowed to talk about it, or we can't ask questions about it until then. Is that right?
Yeah, we can't discuss the details of the proposed budget until you've been provided a draft or been provided that proposed budget, and the budget officer delivers the budget message, which will happen at that first meeting. What that does is that ensures that there aren't any, backdoor meetings or covert operations with respect to the city's budget that aren't transparent to the community. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, Molly?
Yeah, Rob, when is the or Dan, whoever, when do we anticipate getting the budget book?
Should be around the 15th. I think our first meeting's on the 20th. Don't quote me on that date because I don't know if that's a Saturday, but actually
20th is the first meeting. That's a Tuesday.
Okay. So it should be late that week prior.
Okay. And then are we doing it the same way we did last year, where the departments present their budgets and we have some discussion about what's in it? Because there's not a lot of time between getting it and having a meeting on the 20th and approving it by the end of April.
Right.
So
we technically do have that meeting on the 4th as scheduled, okay. But we don't have to use it if we've moved quickly. But yeah, you'll have a little bit of time, and then I think the intent is that we will have departments present, similarly, kind of a few minute presentations at a time, just some of the detail, some of the major changes, highlights, those kinds of things.
Okay, and that just for new members, that last year meant budget meetings twice a week. While we were doing that, is that your intention that we're going to need that, or do you think not?
You've got the 27th and 29th of April scheduled, okay. So that's the one twice a week.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise council gets Monday and then a Tuesday on the 19th and 20th, and then I believe there might be another one if we go to the 4th meeting, that kind of thing. But realistically, try to minimize some of that, and it's also to give us some time to react if there are some substantive changes in between the meetings.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, Dan, I'll turn it over to you. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks. And I am around if any of you have questions that come up or you think of questions later, please feel free to reach out.
And definitely, Rob, feel free to interrupt me if I start to go down any rabbit holes. But as Rob said, try to give you some information here around philosophical, his being the structure, mine being the philosophical, as to kind of where we're thinking about making decisions within the budget, and how we're thinking about our resources and some of the considerations. Really trying to give you all an opportunity to ask some of the structural questions now, to also have hopefully a framework, something that when you're deliberating, looking at the packet, you're thinking about, well, you said that this was important, how come it's not reflected? Some of those kinds of things, and just keeping us on our toes to make sure that we're delivering the budget we should. So this is, background information in essence, in conformance with the Oregon budget law. So trying to stay somewhat free of detail. So if you want to give me the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the enormity. Sorry, I couldn't resist a little bit of levity here, but just the idea of this, this being, what is it, the Ever Given in the Suez Canal. And, really for me, it was a little bit thinking about what the task is ahead of all of us, is trying to make headway of these really long-term goals and really aspirational community vision that we all have, and trying to use the tools that we have to get there. Obviously, they were successful in getting the Ever Given out of the ditch or whatever they were stuck in the side of the Suez Canal, and so I think we're going to get there, honestly, and I say that seriously, not in jest, but a little bit of levity, hopefully, for the presentation here. Next slide, please. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about, and feel free to interrupt me with questions. I can't really see everybody, so you may just have to interrupt verbally or raise hand or whatever works. But really going to try and talk a little bit about the budget development pieces, and probably more for the benefit of the residents of the budget committee, given that we're going to talk a little bit about council goals. And for everyone, actually, we're going to preview for the first time. We're going to talk a little bit about our internal values statement, and something that we're going to roll out to our staff here very shortly, but want to use that as well when we're thinking about filters for budget decisions and how we're achieving goals and things like that that are set out by council and by residents for the city organization. The basis for decision making by the few of us who were evaluating the requests from the department heads, and then cut but considered items, really thinking about that more philosophically than specifically. But we will provide you a list of the items that were asked for, what we called ads, or items. Essentially what we asked for was a status quo budget from departments, and then an ad package, and in essence a written summary of request. Why was it pertinent? What was it going to help us accomplish? How much would it cost? All of those kinds of things, and really then try to evaluate those using a criteria. And so we'll talk a little bit about the criteria that we used, and when we provide you that list, hopefully it'll again make some sense in comparison. And then finally, what likely is a bit the elephant in the room, which is actually not actually in the room yet, the American Rescue Program, a rescue plan, which is really not going to be in the budget. And I'm just going to tell you that now, because we don't know enough about it. And so we'll talk a little bit about it at the very end, but there's not going to be, I think what we'll end up doing is a supplemental process, and try and maybe float this idea now, since I'm not sure what you were, what you signed up for in terms of being the budget committee, but we would like to request you to meet quarterly throughout the year rather than annually. And I think that given the year that we're expecting with the rescue plan money coming in, we think sometime in June, that might actually help, right? We will have a new set of allocations to consider, and then just a way for some transparency and some accountability for us as we go forward and implementing the budget. Just float that idea now. So next slide, please. So some of the considerations, I think Rob covered some of these in the sense of, we're dealing still with COVID. As I was writing the budget message, I looked back at my notes from last year, and I think what Rob said was exactly true. Is we're thinking, oh, it'll be a few months, man, this is kind of scary, but it'll be a blip. We'll come back from it, and by the end of the year, we'll see some recovery. And I think that was arguably how we budgeted TLT and the transient lodging tax, thinking that folks are going to be able to travel and things will change, and certainly that has not been the case. And so as we've had this evolving kind of public health disaster of COVID globally, we're still expecting that there'll be some shoe to drop from the local government standpoint, because as Rob also mentioned, that things lag in local government funds typically, that when there's a disruption in property taxes, it'll come later. It won't be an immediate thing. And so we're nervous looking at the budget and looking at the future, and it certainly is not a clear crystal ball kind of moment. Limited funds, I think that's always the case. You don't have the amount of money that you would like to have to do all the things you would like to do. And so trying to be judicious about what we have, also leaving some money in the bank for the future, for future years, and trying to plan for bigger projects, not just the immediate needs we have, but things that we might aspire to do as well. Organizational change, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail about that, but the fact that one of the city council goals, specifically around our organizational culture, be more customer service oriented, we're implementing some changes right now to achieve that, and we'll talk about those, but also just thinking about how do we adapt our practices, that all the headwinds that we're going to experience, we need to change how we have been doing things and continue to adapt in order to be more efficient with the resources that we do have. So that's people and funds that were given by residents and entrusted with. Infrastructure continues to be an issue, specifically in Newberg, and I think something that we've been trying to play catch up on, but also just generally trying to maintain. And so infrastructure tends to be very expensive, and we don't want to kick the can, but we're trying to make sure that we have what we need to have the systems that folks expect: water, wastewater, streets, all kinds of other fun things like that may not be glamorous or sexy or anything, maybe not even all that interesting to folks, but when they don't work, they will come knocking at the door. And so we're trying to make sure that we have funded those appropriately. City council goals, we'll go into that in a minute. And then community engagement. One of the things that is also super important to me is asking folks in the community what they think, what do they want? How do we build trust? It's by asking them and then delivering on the things that they want. And so I came into the role having a Newberg community vision being adopted August of 2019, and City Council's goals in January of 2020. Those are great blueprints, a path forward for me to essentially try to implement some activities to move the city forward. And without engagement, though, we sort of don't know how to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so want to make sure that we're investing in listening to folks and listening to the whole community. Next slide, please. So the city council's goals, say this more again for the folks who are not councilors, but the council goals, just to summarize the 5 that we're working with right now, our customer service culture, and sub to that was resolving our ongoing legal disputes, the things that were negatively getting us in the newspaper. I think we're making progress there on customer service in particular, but diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our ongoing internal culture, affordable housing and affordable and workforce housing, urban renewal plan, and this essentially the sub to that, or the next step to that, is an authority, an urban renewal authority. And then the last one is sustainability, and specifically working with the community. There's a group of residents who are actively working on sustainability programs, and also with ICLEI, which is an organization the city joined right before I got here. And so those 5 goals are sort of the big things that we're trying to move down the path to achieve, sort of aspirationally, how can we take a chunk to move down the path each year. And so we've tried to do some things in the budget to fund those activities. Next slide. So diving a little bit into the mission and vision and value, sort of the what do we do, where are we going, and then how do we do it? This is something that's super important to me. I think Beth read off the mission and the vision. The vision here on this slide is actually different because it's from the community vision document, the 2019 plan. But without reading ad nauseum, these are, essentially where we start, the why do we exist, and then where are we going, especially thinking about it in a 20-year arc. We're wanting to achieve a place that is, is beautiful, that has a lot of strong relationships within the community, has culture, a strong sense of place, a strong economy, and collaborative leaderships throughout the community. And so what are we going to do to set those things in place? I think that's something we want to look for in the budget as well, but also, with the next slide, a little bit about how we internally think that we will set the organization internally on a path to achieve some of those goals as well. And so with that, we've come up with Strive. And so this is new to council as well as residents. So, this is a road test of Strive, but wanted to, again, include that as part of the discussion in the budget consideration. So Strive, the acronym, it comes from service, teamwork, responsibility, inclusion, value, and excellence. And we're in the process of developing essentially a roadshow for that, to talk to internal staff groups, to really kind of have images and other ways to sort of embed that within the organizational culture. And we chose these intentionally, these values, after a few discussions of the department heads and really a lot of thinking about what aspirationally have we gotten, both from the city council and also from residents in other things like a Newberg community vision. What are the things that are going to help us make sure that we've got the right people, the quote unquote right people on the bus, right? How do we know we've got the next great person who's going to be a teammate in our organization? So service, we talk about customer service as a city council goal, but also just the importance of being of service to one another, and really the importance of that in the way that we can build trust and we can demonstrate our professionalism and work to problem solve issues that come forward to the city or to individuals within departments, whether it's an internal or an external kind of relationship. Teamwork, really thinking about the fact that we are one team and that we should be thinking about ourselves holistically. It's not, as often becomes the case, it's City Hall versus someone else. It's not about that. It's really about, playing for the team on the front, not the name on the back kind of thing. We are working towards a collective goal. If we can't work as one team, we will not achieve our goals for the community. And so really emphasizing the importance of collaboration, of working together, and being respectful, frankly, of each other and of the community members, making sure that we're living that kind of culture. Responsibility, really, my mind, government exists to do the things that collectively that we can't do individually. And so the responsibility to do those things, to do them efficiently, to do them effectively, to do them with all of those positive attributes. We were also there to make good decisions, to use our talents, to use the training that we're provided, to be excellent employees, and to serve well, and to take the responsibility of being a public servant, and really do the best that we can with that. So taking the responsibility to be a high performer is something that's important. Inclusion also speaks to the diversity, equity, and inclusion goal that the council has, but it's trying to embed the idea that we want respectful communication. We want to offer dignity and compassion to everyone who comes through the door or who reaches out to work with the city or for service from the city. And we want to really talk about learning about each individual and understanding our differences, and really continuing that journey where we're collaborating with all residents and trying to make Newberg the best place we can possibly make it as a community. Value, really talk about best value, and sort of maybe sounds a little bit wonky, because I think it in my mind, it goes back to, we want to buy things that are of the highest quality, the best value. But really what we're talking about is the fact that we are entrusted as stewards to public funds, to steward public funds. And that's where we come back to the budget, right? That we're here to use the resources we are allocated to most effectively move the community forward and to provide those services. And so value is super important. We want to make sure that we are providing the services efficiently, effectively, and with some level of innovation. So as I said before, we want to continue to improve. We want to get better. And so the value is also speaking to the idea that we're continuing our journey. It's not just a how we've always done things mentality. And then last is excellence. And really we want to reach excellence by individual and by collective action. And so, again, we're trying to learn, we're trying to grow, we're trying to provide the best we can possibly do. And, we're not shooting for just okay and so. We're shooting to be the best possible we can be. And, it's not to be a comparison, I suppose, to any other place or any other organization, but it's to be the best that we can achieve, and to continue to strive for something more, right? Continuous improvement and those kinds of things. So I'm going to pause there, since again that's a whole new thing, but I'm just not sure if there maybe are questions around that, the sets of values, but just wanted to kind of roll that out there and give you a little more detail on that, because I think it's important. Stunned silence.
Actually, Dan, it feels like with this, you might be able to unlock a good customer service culture. You might be able to figure out what element is missing that gets in the way of it. So it seems like a very organized approach to organizational change. Seems good.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm hoping that by rolling it out and using it as a vehicle to have ongoing conversation, that it will be that culture builder, right? Culture doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't happen because we snap our fingers. And so we're going to have to spend a lot of time on it, but we're hoping to be comprehensive and have that sense of movement, right? That we're not just identifying here's where we are and we're great. It's an opportunity to continually strive, to continually get better.
Dan, this is Bryce.
Yep.
Yeah, love the values. I mean, these all make sense to me. They're clear. I'm also a sucker for acronyms. I don't know if that's the technical term for this, if it's an acronym. Words are hard. All of them, like Molly said, are clear. One thought I did have, though, is that as you were talking, about service and team responsibility, inclusion, and value, a lot of that, to me, also encapsulated excellence, right? Like excellence to me is an outcome that we want associated with service, right? And excellent teamwork. You talked about responsibility, right? Driving us to being able to serve and produce and be present in ways that are excellent, right? And values there too. And so I was thinking, if excellence is present in these others, the E could, to me, be a space where we really lean into equity. And that's going to be a spot where people are like, well, there's inclusion there. Why do we have to have equity as well? And I think that becomes a good learning moment, right? To be able to talk about and differentiate inclusion from equity. And so, yeah, that would be my suggestion. And I think worth maybe having a conversation about, because I know that for the council, right, equity is an explicit goal as well as inclusion. And this could be a way where, you can boom, boom, get both going and use it as we're driving or use it to drive a lot of decision-making and conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way that I would imagine this going is a lot of people kind of, when we go around and talk to the work groups, is a lot of questioning faces, like, okay, and how do I do this? And what does this mean? And then being able to have that dialogue around, well, you tell me, what does it mean? And how do we build? And seeing that come up together. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there could be some interchanging E's and probably other letters as well as we go forward, just trying to think about what really resonates with those work groups, and each can make it their own under that collective umbrella.
Yeah, no, definitely, that makes sense.
All right, I think ready for the next slide, maybe. So want to share the criteria, trying to stay clear of that pesky budget law, but, essentially offer the way we looked at requests for additional funds, and, really thinking about it. We wanted to have criteria, and I wanted to leave that word in there to remind myself that, yeah, criteria, it was important to actually think about how we might award points and consider things fairly against each other, because I think there's a tendency in the budget process to really fund those who make good presentations. And, there are differing levels of skill in every organization. And so, those who continue to excel at being convincing, while that is important, should not always get all the money. And so we wanted to think about it in terms of, how requested project or program met council goals, whether it was a mandated activity, something that, whether it was state or federal, or our own requirements, whether it was a mandated thing to do, whether there was already funding identified, and if so, from where. And whether it was maybe a full or partial amount of funding. And so where we could offset essentially some of the allocation we might make. Whether it was an investment in the long term, I think when we're talking about ARP and some of the federal funds that we're going to get, these one-time monies can help us create long-term programs and essentially long-term sustainability in the community and meet some goals we have, but you also have immediate needs. And so, does this immediate request for funds, does it create an efficiency that can carry forward long-term and maybe have some future cost savings? Does it limit our legal exposure? And, it sort of fits with the mandate thing, but I think in essence, it's, is this a compliance thing? Is there, is there risk to not funding it? And so a little bit different than a mandate. And then does it, we're thinking about the internal services or central services in particular, because we're talking in a slide or two about some significant changes in what's the makeup of those, what are 3 departments right now, but also, we've got, as much as I love Rob and the fact that we're super happy to have Rob, Rob is here because we have a gap, right? We had Matt providing finance director function for years and years, and now we don't. And so there's some change and strain there. And so as we go through those changes in staffing, we need to be realistic about adding more new things into the mix. I think, change fatigue is going to be real for the internal services folks this next budget year and probably beyond. And so we need to be real about how much additional we are adding to that work group. And then last was future cost avoidance. And so, are there things that by adding this that we're avoiding in the future, in essence? And so that was the criteria. Hopefully that makes some sense. I don't know if there are any questions or comments about how we evaluated things, but in essence, we were trying to think about ways to give points and then rank, and then arguably even within the funds, there's a difference, where we've got maybe general fund impact versus, a specific enterprise fund or a dedicated fund. There may be some differences. I see a couple of hands, so I thought I saw Stephanie's first, but
I'm just wondering, will we see the point values and then the points awarded to those things in our budget? Or is that just a tool that you used?
It was a tool that we used. I think it probably won't be in the budget itself, but I think what we were talking about, I think the request was to see all of the ads that were requested. So I think we have it in a spreadsheet, so we can probably provide that spreadsheet to you and, kind of see some of the things that were requested.
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing that, mostly because I would like to see what your idea of like how these rank. So I certainly want to see what the points awarded to each of the add-ons are, but I'm also equally interested in how many points are awarded to each of these and where you feel like these fall on the priority list from first to last. So I'd be interested in seeing that.
Okay. Bryce, I think you were the other hand.
Yes, yeah. Echo/ditto what Stephanie said. Also love the criteria. That's good work. The other question I had, so this is around evaluating ads. I'm wondering if there was a similar process for evaluating the status quo budget that you mentioned. I think, we'd like to assume that the status quo meets all these criteria, and I suspect that that's not always true. So yeah, that's really where my question comes from.
Yeah, actually, in terms of the actual criteria and ranking, no, we did not use criteria like this for the status quo. I think it's a little bit different, and it's challenging. One of the things that I still want to do very much is a program-based approach for how we do our budget, and I think that's, to me, where I start to see some of these things discreetly, and it's easier then to put metrics to it and to compare and all those things. It's, while we did talk through what the requests were and how they might have differed from year to year in terms of the status quo, I'm not sure that there was really a lot in terms of criteria there that we could grab onto that were holistic. I think you could argue that, you can apply some of those similar criteria in terms of council goals and things like that. But because a lot of those things were arguably ongoing, then it's a question of how are you going to change, or what about this might be different, or how are you going to make this about council goals, that kind of thing.
I see. Can I ask a quick follow-up, Molly?
Yep.
And this really is a question. This isn't, some people, they ask a question, but it's really just like a sort of passive-aggressive way of saying what they want to say. This is not that. So in this process, because it's my first time going through it, are we more so coming together to go over just the ads portion, and it's more or less assumed that all the status quo will move forward as it has been?
No, you're here to, as far as I'm concerned, you're here to look at the whole and to make decisions on the whole of it.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you.
And that was going to be my follow-on to yours, Bryce, is that as we go through, if there are cuts that have been made and we're like, oh, what happened to that? Or ads that didn't make the list that seem to be a higher priority, that's the point at which we, I think, turn to Dan and say, so if we had to do a trade-off here, what in the status quo would make sense to you? And assuming you've already looked at it, right, and made that decision, kind of to Stephanie's point, you help us understand your thought process. Because I want to respect the department and the city manager's knowledge of this. And I think part of our job is reaching an understanding so we can also explain it I mean, part of being on budget committee is being able to represent to the rest of the community why things were done. So those questions absolutely get asked, Bryce, about stuff that is in the budget and not being asked about. At least they have been the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of questions around, if this, then what? And so we've sort of balanced things, with the assumptions that we'll share in the first meeting, but certainly could be a difference of opinion or some recommendations to move those things one way or the other. And that's part of the role, I think, in terms of the larger funds and things like that. It's not, and Rob will maybe nod, maybe scold me, but it's not about the pencils. It's about, what are the pencils going to do and how is that moving forward on our goals and, those kinds of things. So next slide, Sue. So some of the considerations, talk about criteria and, how important it is to people be able to rank things. But I think it's also one of those things, what are we trying to do when we're thinking about adding to the budget or thinking about moving some things around in the budget? And, some of the stuff that we're considering, IT related things, thinking about changes to programming and or the fact that right now we're all working from home or Zoom everything or whatever we're talking about in terms of technology and technology, accepting the fact that technology is not a fad and that it's driving all the work that we're doing, and we're only adding systems and those kinds of things. And so we need to maintain them. We need to think about storage of records and things of that nature. And so, how are we thinking about those? Thinking about urban renewal as one of the 5 goals from the city council, but also some of the mandates that we have to continue with like actual urban planning, but also the things that did not change with COVID, I guess, is the fact that development continued. People still built houses and land was dirt was being turned and all those things. And so those shot clocks or times around, things that we needed to maintain the plans that come forward to city council with updates and things like that, those did not stop, and the mandates around those did not change. And so, there's a consideration that we need to keep up with that. Our ongoing equipment needs, one of the things that I very much am interested in is what equipment do we have? How much equipment do we have? Where is the equipment? All of that stuff. And so, knowing what we have in order to know when we need to replace it and what condition it's in, those kinds of things, that's an important consideration, I think, when we're thinking about the resources we have. Staff positions, thinking about, are we adding people? That's an ongoing cost, but sometimes it's necessary to add capacity to address specific work. And if we're going to do that, we should, in my opinion, do it judiciously so that we're not adding so much cost that we can't maintain our future programs, and you end up laying that person off in the future. So being very cautious about that, but thinking about how to augment our capacity. And that last point about the actual capacity, I think Rob already stole the thunder on that one, that we want to actually get stuff done. If we're budgeting for it, let's do it. And so when we talked about capital, I mean, it's across the board in the budget. It's not just capital. It's, if we were saying we're going to do it, it's something that, you all said agreed with us that it was important. And if we funded it, we should try to complete the work. And if we don't think we're going to get it done, then let's be realistic about it and kick it into reserves and try it next year. So I think that's it for that one. And we can go to the next slide. So thinking about how to balance the budget, that's the art, the magic. I think those are the descriptions for Rob. Hopefully it wasn't too much sorcery, but thinking about it in terms of how to get the house in order. I will admit there's a fair amount of, having been here a little over a year now, there's a fair amount of the internal structural pieces of the operations of the city that I'm told can be improved. And so we need to work on our processes and I mentioned the tools and resources, but making sure that we are service minded, but also thinking about how we can improve, and thinking about that as a little bit the foundation of a house, right? We need to we get the house in order so it doesn't fall down. And so there's some of the budget that is spent on those internal things that may not be the most sexy things, but I think if you can do them well, they become efficient and you're not spending as much time or money on them, and they can provide efficiencies such that maybe, for instance, people are paying their bills online and it's able to see all kinds of information because we have advanced metering, for instance, in our public works, some of those kinds of things, that if we can invest in the right technologies, then folks are independent in how they're doing their work, whether it's city staff or residents. We do have a structural deficit. I think for those who are new, this has been a theme in the past in budget discussions. It's something that we're trying to put a plan forward and at least have a conversation about how to address. There are some active steps that we've taken in terms of cutting in the general fund. And that, not to go into too much depth here, hopefully, Rob, but again, it's this idea that the general fund can do certain things, and there are other funds that you can't cross the streams and actually use the money interchangeably. And so we're talking about one fund. While we are maybe flush in other areas, we're not in the general fund because we've already allocated beyond our means. And so we're working we put forward a plan to address at least a portion of that in this year, and all of it in a structural sense, but in terms of balance, but in terms of the structural sense of actually dealing with the deficit, we've only taken a portion. We're, of course, I think this is my third or fourth mention of city council goals and the Newberg community vision goals, so I won't go into that in detail, but the last is just really maintenance and replacement of equipment. And so just trying to catch up on things that have been deferred in the past. So the next slide, this is where, not that maybe much of a secret or anything, and hopefully not a lot of detail of what's in the budget, because I think we're talking about a structural thing. We're not talking about how we're funding it, but we are restructuring the way we do internal work. And so we're calling it, I think for now, central services, but we can call it, whatever you want. But especially if it helps pass the budget. Just kidding. The assistant city manager position, Kezia's role, and initially was really focused on human resources, but I think as we've had these opportunities, I've had a little more time in the organization. We've had some opportunities come up with staff leaving and some change, realizing that what is probably a better model is freeing Kezia up to do more of the higher level internal controls and some of the strategy implementation of some of our goals and things like that, some initiative type projects, but also really putting our central services or our finance, IT, and human resources in a collective so that they're working together and really focused on providing service to the rest of the organization. I like to call them, and it's maybe a weird thing, but I like to call them the fishbowl's fishbowl. And so when you think about the city being a bit of a fishbowl, we work for members of the public and we are meant to be transparent. They're meant to be even more transparent and to anticipate and provide ahead of what the externally focused departments need. And if they're not able to do that, you see it in services externally. And so really looking to align them around service and trying to align them in a way that blends some of it. So we've got more of a partnership model and providing those services to the big dogs, as it were, the folks who have a lot of staff or consume a lot of resources in a way that's more effective. I'll pause there again. I feel like I'm maybe diving a little bit deep, but if there are questions. All right, so next slide. Just, and I don't think this speaks to the actual budget allocations, but this is more of a work program expectation from me. And I've noted on here the council priorities, and I think we've hit all 5. And so the idea that we're working to complete the urban renewal program implementation essentially and get that authority up and running. And the authority is meant to persist for 30 years. And so the idea that the work is not going to be complete in this year, but the work to get that authority set up should be complete, we hope, knock wood. The realignment that I just mentioned, focus on customer service, asset management program, diversity, equity, and inclusion implementation. We got a presentation last night at the council meeting of an equity assessment, and I know we've got some ideas on implementation ourselves and some training. Addressing housing, that's something we've got I think we had closed. So we had a position that was open for a little while there as a housing planner, and it was specifically working on the work plan. I think the council will sort of nod their heads at the 53 item or whatever it is now for Doug, but trying to hand off that work program to an individual who can carry it forward and address that affordable workforce housing goal. And then improving and creating, in some cases, processes, procedures, and manuals and written steps, so that if and when we have transition and roles, we actually know what's been done, what the expectations were, and how to improve. Addressing community impacts of COVID, I think we'll do that through the American Rescue Plan and among other things, but we'll obviously have, I think, lingering COVID hangover, and so hopefully we'll come out of it and it will all be okay. But that's something that I think we're going to need to work on for quite a while in this year. And then lastly, working, as mentioned, with the community sustainability group on this sustainability goal. Any questions on that work program? All right, last slide of any substance. So the American Rescue Plan, ARP.
Actually, Dan, I think Molly had a question.
Okay.
Sorry, Dan, it's probably, usually the first item on any work plan is just sustaining of operations. And so that's an assumed item on there that probably consumes a majority of your budget. Is that a good assumption? Yeah.
I think that is a good assumption. I was trying to call out some of those items as both the goal targeted items, but also some of the things that might be a little more interesting to this group. But yes, yeah, some of the boring stuff too.
Thank you.
Yep.
So remember, budgeting is fun.
Mental. Any other questions? Okay, so the ARP or ARPA, I think they're calling it now, but huge law now, huge in terms of funding. As I mentioned, we're not going to budget for them right now because we really aren't sure when we're going to get them. But we are expecting over 2 years a full amount of $4.87 million that will be split evenly between those 2 years, is my understanding. Tranche is a new federal word apparently, but we're going to get the first tranche, we think, in June. It came with a 90-day shot clock for disbursement from the federal government. It was adopted on the 11th of March, and so theoretically June 11th. Although there are a couple of options, I believe 2 or 3 30-day extensions that states can ask for in distributing the money. So the money comes from the feds to the states and then goes to the local governments. And so it's just not certain as to when, if it's going to be June or if there's going to be delays. The question as well is, like, how can we use it? It seems pretty wide open right now, but I'm aware that they're writing the rules as we speak. And so that sort of adds some level of complexity if we're thinking about allocations. And so again, that's why one of the reasons we chose not to allocate yet. The act as a whole, the 1.9 trillion comes with a lot of not specific direct allocations to local government, a lot of programs that I think we're going to be interested in as a community. And so I would imagine, in particular, public works with some infrastructure ideas, working with community partners who may want to avail themselves of grants and things like that. And then probably in the economic health realm, trying to link up with businesses and really be very intentional about providing support to them in recovery. But at this point, we're not sure of all the details, and so we know the funding is out there and it's coming, and we'll talk more about it in the future. Are there any questions about ARP that we may not be able to answer? All right, well, that was my last slide of substance. So I will just say thank you for hanging in there.
I think Mike had a question.
Okay.
So on that ARP money, did you say it's not going to be budgeted at this time because we're not really knowing what's going to show up? So I guess what I guess I'm saying is that then it will most likely, you think it's going to show up and we'll be able to put it in next year's budget at that point because we'll know exactly what we have or how is that going to work?
I think we'll do a supplemental process after. It'll just come, essentially, we'll probably get it right as we're, knock wood, I guess, adopting the final step of the council on the budget. And so in essence, you're wanting to then dive back into a budget process. I think we'd probably want to do some public engagement around, especially thinking about community investments and things like that. And just, I think, come back to the budget committee and have a little bit more of a process specific to that as a supplemental, because it'll be a large sum. And then next year, and as we go forward, we'll have that knowledge of what we can use it for. I would imagine including it, that second tranche of money, we'll just budget it as we do now.
So if we have a supplemental, we call for a supplemental budget, it's going to include everybody, the council and the budget, the lay people that's on the budget committee. So it'll be all of us.
That's what we're thinking right now.
All right.
Yeah, there's a process in local budget law for something of this size. I think Rick has a question down there.
Yeah, it's actually just more a comment. I said this before at City Council, and I actually was on a meeting today where I said it again with county commissioners. It's a lot of money coming into these communities. It needs, in my opinion, needs to be absolutely transparent as to where the money is going and why. And up to the point where the county commissioners said today that they were going to post everything on their website with an actual set website for this. Again, just to make sure that everyone knows what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, thank you.
Any other questions for either of the presenters? Okay, some advice from wise people who run meetings. Before we go to public comment, do we need to address extending the budget committee's work that Mike just referenced and you referenced, Dan, to a quarterly? Do we need to address that, or can we just put that off and address it as we get to the end of our process? In other words, sometimes you would entertain a motion that says we are going to continue to do this. Do people want a chance to think about this first and then we'll address it in the next meeting? Or just wait till the end of the process and then institute? Because normally the budget committee ends when we make our approved budget to the city. So Rob, thoughts?
I don't have an exact answer for that, but I can work with Dan and try and get some information out to the group at that, during the budget committee process. There are some models currently in play. The city of Wilsonville does a similar situation where they meet quarterly. I'm not exactly sure how the whole public notification of that process works yet, but we'll get you an answer.
Yeah, just so we do it appropriately, whatever the appropriate way is.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, secondly, on the ARP, given that you're going to go through your entire budget process and you have ads and things that you want that you're not going to be able to do because we already know that, to what you can spend the money on, it would seem like you would continue to use the information from your budget process in determining what to spend, or are there other factors that you're thinking of using there?
It really, I don't know if it depends all that much. I guess I'm really thinking about it in terms of how we put money into the community recovery. And so I think they're different. Our operations hopefully support the community, but I'm not sure that they necessarily automatically address the need in recovery from COVID. And so I think it would be smart to look for ways to do that more effectively. And so it might be a different set. I think we could use criteria that are similar, but I think we would want a different set of proposals. And arguably, we may want to have proposals from the community as well as proposals from our staff and kind of a split and think about it that way. But I think we probably want to talk about philosophically what makes sense and, how to divvy out the money when we get there.
Okay, thank you. With that, if there aren't any other questions, I'll ask Sue, it's time for public comment. Sue, do we have anyone?
No, not this evening.
You were supposed to take longer to say that so I could check out the agenda again. So our next step in process is the budget committee meeting, which is Tuesday, April 20th, and we will have the binders, you said, a few days before. Is that correct?
Yeah, our target is the 15th.
The 15th, okay. And then the process, just so folks know, is then we will kind of walk through that budget book with the department heads explaining both sustaining as well as ads, cuts, that kind of thing, Dan? Is that the?
Yeah, that's the plan at least. And, obviously we'll have opportunities for Q&A there. I think one of the questions in terms of structure was the public comment and whether we were going to have just once or whether the committee wanted to offer that every meeting and kind of how to do that.
I think we had it as an agenda item in every meeting last time, but I'm open. Do people have thoughts on that? Beth, I know it didn't actually get used much like tonight, but providing the opportunity is kind of a transparency thing. So I would continue to have it on our agenda.
We've actually advertised that there will be an opportunity for public input at that first meeting. The advertisement will go out here this week, I think. So there's been public notice that there could be public input.
There you go.
Okay. Cool.
Well, thank you all for sticking in and hanging through the whole of this. I know it's back to back for the council and appreciate everybody spending their evening with us.
And nobody even fell asleep. That's really good. All right, so then we may adjourn this meeting formally. Is that correct? And let you all go home? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll see you on the 20th.
Yep, good night.